Hey, Trekkers, and welcome to another episode of Trek Tonight. Once again, I'm here with my good buddies, Leo Genesek and Joe Townsall. How are you, gents?
Doing great, thank you.
Good.
Another day in paradise.
Even better way to put it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Tonight, we're going to be taking a look at another TOS episode that had long-reaching, far-reaching influences, but it's in a very small way. It's very interesting. We're going to be talking about Return of the Archons. But before we get into that, you guys have anything that you got going on you want to talk about before we start?
The only thing that I've got going on, and let me share this with you. I put out, as I've mentioned before, I do Star Trek haikus every day on Twitter.
Right.
Because not because I particularly like Elon Musk or his philosophy, but it is a good medium for short bites of information.
Yeah. Well, your haikus were pre-Musk, weren't they?
Yes, they were pre-Musk,
right.
and hopefully will be post-Musk. Anyway, anyway, so
that's how you really feel, Leo.
About our favorite new helmsman, Lieutenant Erica Ortegas.
Yes.
And I tagged the actress, Melissa Navia, and she actually liked it. So
isn't that fun?
That was pretty cool.
That's fun. That's great.
And I will read it to you because it is a haiku and it's very short.
Yes, of course.
Ortegas pilots never joins the landing parties, but she's got that hat. For those who've seen that little clip of season 2 where she's very excited about going down on a planet and she's got her whole outfit on, including the hat.
Yep.
And the Pike's like, sorry, we need you up here because there's some, we need somebody to really, pilot the ship through this dangerous area. And, and you could tell how disappointed she is. So, right. I was delighted to see that she had.
That's great, and that is what's fun about things like Twitter, because you can, in a way, reach out to people, and
I've had it a few times.
That's right.
I'm going to look like an idiot. The actor who played Shran in Enterprise and also. Played
Jeffrey Combs.
Jeffrey Combs, yes.
There you go.
The Renaissance man of the Star Trek franchise. I did a Jeffrey Combs haiku that he liked, and of course I got a little love. I got some love from Aaron Watke, one of the executive producers of Star Trek Prodigy. So slowly building the brand.
Oh yeah, there you go. There you go. Hey, Scott Taylor just gave us a thumbs up. Scott, good to see you.
Scott.
And let's see. I don't know that we're going to hear from our good buddy Keith tonight.
No, he's
traveling or something.
I believe he's in Minnesota at this point. He's going to visit his lady friend.
Yes.
And I imagine that since he got here today, he's probably going to really listen for about an hour. I need to listen to 4 old guys talk about Star Trek. Something you have no interest in.
I can't believe he's not forcing her to sit down and watch an epised of Trek Tonight.
I've met her. It's not for her. And it's okay.
Well, you know what, guys? There is Trek, and there are priorities. So
yes,
right, exactly. but the irony of it is, and the shame of it is that tonight's episode was suggested by Keith.
It's true.
And we ended up having sort of a debate online about 2 or 3 days ago about this episode. Mainly because I sat down and watched it. I'd seen it somewhat recently, but I sat down and watched it. And I kept waiting for this big Prime Directive thing to show up. And then Spock has one sort of throwaway line where he mentions the Prime Directive of non-interference.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Oh, yeah.
And yet Keith's point was that one line of dialogue ended up getting spun into a whole concept later on.
Yes.
Right. So it's not as obvious a
no, it was sort of like it was like a throwaway line that got expanded upon. Sometimes throwaway lines just are that.
Right.
But it definitely spawned a whole very important element of Star Trek.
And for those of us who may or may not or want a refresher, let me show you the original promo for the episode of Return of the Archons.
Stardate 3192.1. Trying to find some trace of the starship Archon that disappeared 100 years ago. A search party has been sent to the planet below. Spock, those power readings you took, are they
powerful enough to destroy a starship?
There's another one. We gotta get out of here. You know what they're capable of. Only you.
Andrew, he comes.
I am Landru. For the good of the body, you must die.
Scary.
And they make fun of Pike's hair. Wow, that hair on Landru is wild, isn't it?
It is. He's got a very substantial volume of hair going on upstairs. Or
I don't know
good
who
wig
that
game.
reminds me of, but I don't know, Dorothy Hamill or something. I don't know who that is.
It's kind of a slight pompadour. So,
Yeah. Crazy.
It's interesting. I rewatched this episode. I've not seen this one in quite a while.
Right.
I can't say that this is my favorite episode.
Right.
And there are elements of it that are genuinely spooky. Because the thing is, everybody is very, very calm, except during the red hour, which I guess is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Right.
Where it just becomes, do whatever the hell you want. And then what's interesting, then everybody just goes back to sort of resets to this calm point.
Right.
But also nobody, like, they don't immediately start cleaning up the street either. They just walk you like,
right.
Well, they needed weapons later.
Who cleans that up? Yeah. Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I'm just saying the reason they didn't clean up the streets because they needed weapons later the next day to attack
That's
Kirk
true.
and company.
They're stoning and beating.
It does have sort of a weird zombie apocalypse vibe to it.
Yeah.
At moments.
Yeah.
I'm not sure this is a good episode. It's what I like to call a backlot episode, where they're using costumes and props that just happen to be on the backlot that they could access with, for little money,
Well, and I'm going to assume that's the same Mayberry set that they used in Mary and
probably.
Yeah, I think it is. I'm not sure. It looks similar.
That very sort of turn of the 20th century sort of vibe to it.
Yeah.
I have to say, except for the Prime Directive, you could almost forget about this episode. It's not like except for the Prime Directive, the rest of it doesn't seem to matter. I don't know.
Well, and you have this, the only part of it that I really sort of enjoy, although it's in a really weird way, is the end. And I can't believe there's a spoiler for anybody, but when they discover that Landru is a computer and Kirk does his talking to computer thing, getting it to malfunction and blow up, which happens in a couple of episodes. He's very flippant at the end.
Yeah.
He's just like, well, it looks like you're going to need a new job,
Yeah.
And then they kind of just F off,
Yeah.
They, like, leave them to deal with their problems.
Do, although they do leave some people, and they're going to bring some Federation sociological experts to help them sort of rebuild their society.
Yeah.
Presumably the whole, it's funny because they happen to land in the town where the Landru computer was, because they talk about that there are millions of people. Right. So presumably they're like all these little communities all over the planet living this sort of, early 20th century American sort of lifestyle.
Yeah. But the Valley may have different ways.
The valleys may indeed. I was reading somewhere that this might be a sort of an allegory for like Stalinism, because everybody seems very like everybody's under control. It's a bit of a Red Scare kind of subtext.
Well, I want to hear from Joe, but then I have another thought too. So, Joe, what did you think?
Well, I mean, this was a good pick, I believe. Thank you, Keith, for the suggestion that be an influential TOS episode for a few reasons. Obviously, in universe, as you mentioned, Chris, we have the first of several Kirk talks a computer to death climaxes here.
Right.
The big elephant in the room for me, though, is outside the universe. I mean, this is clearly an influence for the series of movies for the Purge.
Yeah,
very, very similar there. And I even thought of another influence, and this was actually on Star Wars. Isn't it odd how Yoda talks like all the people in this town?
Come, friends.
Yeah. Well, you know what else I thought of? The body is kind of like the Borg.
Yes. The collective.
There's a Borg-like element to this.
Yeah, yes. Everybody has to be absorbed for the good of the body. And basically they're saying, your individuality is going to be absorbed into this community, which is I don't know. I can't say it's less sinister because it's sinister in its own right. It's not conquering, but it's a similar concept.
It is. Well, it's very, very sort of body vision of the body snatchers, which is definitely like a red menace, subtext.
Right.
But it's also, let's face it, Kirk very quickly destroys Landru with a bit of critical thinking. And despite the fact it can control an entire planet full of people, it also its critical thinking programming is lacking.
Well, yeah, in my opinion, I think he did a better job with
Nomad.
With Nomad.
Yeah.
I think the logic of that argument to force a computer to destroy itself was better done with Nomad than it was done.
I would agree,
Landru, but because to me there's some gaps in the logic. But hey.
Well, I mean, it's like we're doing a little bit of a dive onto this. At the end of the day, it's not the best episode, but it does have that grain of truth that blossoms into further episodes. Which,
yes,
I mean, we could sit here and sort of dissect this thing, but I'm not sure we need to.
Yeah, no, I know, I agree.
It's not the worst episode, but it's certainly not the best episode.
Right.
So I'm not sure even. My issue is that I would have liked them to talk a little more about the Prime Directive, but I guess talking about stuff is not as exciting as
Well, it's interesting, Leo, and I know that you did some diving into other things, but before you get into that, it's interesting that they wrote that line into the script. Did they write that into the script with the idea that they were going to develop this further? Where did it come from?
I'm not. It's funny because it is. It's a late. It's towards the end of the. Is it the first season or is it the second?
First season, episode 21, I believe.
All right.
So it's like towards the end of the first season. I mean, again, a lot of people look at. Excuse me. Like settings for TV shows in terms of world building, and they assume that everything has been set out previously, but in reality, especially a late 60s primetime TV show, they have a Bible where it's like, this is what Kirk is like, this is what Spock is like, this is what McCoy is like, and so on and so forth. This is what the ship is like. But it's not like a fully blown world in the way that, let's say, if you were writing a novel, you're making up your own world, you would, you probably can't fill in all the gaps because then it's just a history book. Then it's the Silmarillion versus Lord of the Rings. But I think a lot of this was made bit by bit. Now it's entirely possible Gene Roddenberry had that idea, and this is the first time they got to insert it. So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
If anybody knows,
do you know anything about that, Joe, or no?
I don't know anything about it for sure. It just seems likely to me that we were making it as we go to some extent, but there was a plan from the beginning. There was, I think, Roddenberry's tendency to inject certain ideas and philosophies into stories, that, especially in the first season. And I think we are seeing a lot of that here.
Well, and as if I'm wrong, somebody should let us know in the comments, but I believe they don't accurately describe the Prime Directive and its rules until season 2 in Bread and Circuses, which is episode 25 of that season. And
I believe you're correct. Yes,
I have a clip. Well, I'll play you guys, and then Leo, I want to get into your deep dive. So let's run this.
Fascinating. This atmosphere is remarkably similar to your 20th century. Moderately industrialized pollution, containing substantial amounts of carbon monoxide, and partially consumed hydrocarbons.
The word was smog.
Yes, I believe that was the term. I had no idea you were that much of a historian, Doctor.
I am not, Mr. Spock. I was simply trying to stop you from giving us a whole lecture on the subject. Jim, is there anything at all we know about this planet?
The SS Beagle was the first ship to make a survey of the star sector when it disappeared.
Then the Prime Directive is in full force, Captain?
No identification of self-omission. No interference with the social development of said planet.
No references to space or the fact that there are other worlds or more advanced civilizations.
Let's go.
Once, just once, I'd like to be able to land someplace and say, behold, I am the Archangel Gabriel.
I fail to see the humor in that situation, Doctor.
Naturally. You could hardly claim to be an angel with those pointed ears, Mr. Spock, but say you landed someplace with a pitchfork.
Well, I believe, Chris, that you're correct. And this is probably the most overt stating of the Prime Directive principles. The only thing I can throw out there, I just looked it up on IMDb to be sure.
Yeah.
Because the Prime Directive, I think, is pretty universally understood to be a then contemporary statement on the Vietnam War. And A Private Little War episode came out before this one was heavily into that message. So that could be related.
Okay.
Yeah,
but it's always funny because we talk about watching Star Trek as kids, and they did not run them in order on WPIX at all. They were just, however, the guy reached behind, pulled the tape out, stuck it in, and ran it. So it wasn't like you were seeing seasons. And I always assumed as a kid that this was the first episode that they talked about the Prime Directive because it's so spelled out exactly what it is. And if you were going to introduce a concept like that, that's what you would do. It's a little bit of, explaining it, but at least it tells you what the rules are. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
No, again, I think you're absolutely correct that that's the first blatant or overt description of the Prime Directive.
Right.
I'm just pointing out that maybe the slightly earlier episode of the Private Little War was kind of like a commentary on Vietnam specifically.
Oh, very much.
Well, definitely.
And then then later on, a more general, long-standing philosophy of the Prime Directive.
Right. Hey, John Van Gostein is here.
Thank you. Hey, John.
Hey, John. Good to see you. All right, Leo, you did some research tonight.
Yeah, I don't think I have every episode where they violate the Prime Directive, but I've got a bunch of them. And I'm going to do sort of a weird. It's maybe one of the more recent ones, but it was in the season finale, the first season of Lower Decks, where they go back to Beta 3.
John says, hello,
hey, John,
everyone.
hello. And Captain Freeman and Commander Ransom are talking to the Betaites. They were like, don't talk to this machine. They've got Landru behind them. It's got all these stickers like, do not talk to this machine. And there's one, they have a image of Kirk and Spock, but it's done in the style of the old Star Trek animated series, which is a nice little note. And while the guy's like, but the red hour's coming and I got a new side. They're like, stop doing that. that's more of a throwaway, but I appreciated also. There's over 100 years in between the Enterprise being there and the Cerritos showing up to do a follow-up.
Right.
Private Little War, as we discussed, very much a Vietnam allegory where the Klingons are providing the valley people with weapons, and the hill people want to get weapons, and at the end, Kirk agrees to keep giving them weapons, and it's presumably sentencing them to an unending war and mass deaths of people from this planet.
Right.
So it's weird that they don't, because it feels like, I mean, obviously the Klingons don't have to operate on the same rule set as the Federation, but it's sort of like, how do you deal with it when the enemy won't play by your rules? There's not like a Geneva Convention where people have a set of rules that both agree to, with the exception, I guess, of the Organian peace treaty.
Right.
But it's more about
and I'm sure I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm sure we'll be getting into that episode next week.
Yes,
I think we're going to do a Klingon episode next week. I think, but that's a good one. That's a really good.
There's Breads and Circuses, which we've touched upon, and what's sort of interesting is they don't actually, the Enterprise crew, go out of the way to not contaminate it, even though it's already been contaminated by first citizen Mericus, Captain Merrick.
Yeah.
So they're able to not say, hey, we're from another planet, except for the Pro Council already knows, but it's not common knowledge. So
right. I mean, it's really pretty much they leave, and with the exception of, I mean, Captain Merrick is dead.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of his crew are still alive, and the only one that really knows about them is the Pro Council.
Yeah.
So,
and he's smart enough to keep his mouth shut.
So, because his whole thing is they don't want their culture contaminated.
Yeah. And I'm going to also talk about A Taste of Armageddon, which is one where is Ambassador Fox is sent to negotiate with the was it the Enivar, and they them and the Vendikar, their neighboring planet, have been at war for like hundreds of years.
Right.
And they've got a thing where they say, well, a bomb goes off in this area, and it's all done by computers, and everybody who lives in that area reports to a disintegration booth. Right. So it is a civilized war, but people are still dying. So Kirk really just takes it in his own hands. He blows up the computer. Again, it's only one computer. There's no backups for these computers, conveniently enough, which for 1960 sensibility works fine. But the idea that the Vendikar are going to be like, oh, if you're not sending people to the disintegration chambers, or the treaty's over. And he basically this is war. It's dirty. It's horrible, but you're gonna have to deal with it. But it is a flagrant breaking of the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
There's the argument that this is maybe a static society, that it is, which is the kind of thing he did with Landru. He's like, this isn't a flourishing society.
But I wouldn't buy that, because quite frankly, the whole point of this computerized war is so that they can continue to let their culture flourish.
Yeah.
So yes, while they're killing their own citizens in an ongoing computerized simulation of war, the point of it is that a real war would destroy their culture.
Oh,
and their cities and their art and their all that stuff. So they are continuing to develop. It's just,
again, it's basically Kirk's like, I don't like this shit.
Yeah.
And then
well, now you got a real war on your hands.
And then he's like, and then he just F's off into to next week's adventure.
Yeah.
Omega Glory, another one. That's a real bananas episode. Parallel evolution, the Yangs and the Kongs, and Captain Tracy is responsible for the pollution of that. But first in the long line of captains and higher officers going nuts. And we had Garth of Izar, and
Well, I mean, he thinks that he's found the fountain of youth. So
Nope.
Yeah.
There's the Apple with Vol.
We love that.
And again, it's like, it's not really a flirt inside, but it's a peaceful society. And Kirk decides, like, you know, maybe it's, I'm trying to remember because I've not seen that episode in a while. I'm sure Vol is doing stuff to the Enterprise and they can't leave, so they have to do it. But it's still like, you know what? I don't like this. I don't really like your setup here. Zap.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, they don't know how to get it on.
No, they don't even know what sex is.
Yeah,
it's
they
like,
don't know.
you know,
So,
they know what children are. They're like you, but littler. You know.
Well, you're right, Leo, because I do recall from the Apple that there was a threat to the Enterprise because there was mention, not showing, of course, but mention of jettisoning the nacelles, just like you know, separating the saucer type of deal.
Right.
So they had to have that artificial dangers to justify Kirk, you know, basically turning their society upside down.
But theoretically, with the Prime Directive, he should not have to, like, he should sacrifice the ship to preserve another society.
Yes. As a matter of fact, where is it that? Oh, well, in Bread and Circuses, they Pro Council actually says back to Kirk, as I understand it, you all swear you would rather die than break this Prime Directive.
Yeah. Smart me, you fucker. And then, of course, there's Patterns of Force, you know, Nazi Planet episode.
Yeah.
And Piece of the Action.
Right.
Whereas that was more of a second contact story. They're trying to clean things up. Also, here's another thing. Much like in Piece of the Action, nobody reacts to Spock's ears in Return of the Archons. Nobody's like, oh, you're not human. You're not like, you know, it just, you know, I mean, he wears the hood, but he's indoors. He's taking the hood off, and their ally is not like, oh, you really are from another planet. You know,
well, they must have mechanical rice pickers on the Archon planet.
I guess so. So there's I don't know if I've missed any others from the original series, but moving into TNG, there's Justice, the episode where Wesley steps on some flowers and is sentenced to death. And depending on your position on Wesley Crusher, this is a good thing or a bad thing. I would say it's a good thing. It's again, Picard argues with there's some sort of like higher intelligence that's looking after the planet, you know, but basically they just take Wesley and they just F off. He's like, he has no repercussions for this.
Right.
And there's the when Picard is worshipped as a god by those proto-Vulcans who watches the Watchers.
Right.
And he tries to be like, listen, I'm just a person, all that stuff. And they're like, no, but you know, the cow is out of the bag.
Yeah. Right.
Although in the Drumhead, which was a 4th season episode, which is actually a really good episode.
It is a good episode.
With the classically trained British actress Gene Simmons, not to be confused with the lead singer of Kiss. She's like that Picard had violated,
or Richard Simmons.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Claims that Picard violated the Prime Directive at least 9 times since he's taken command of the Enterprise. So there's there was First Contact where I'm just rambling on now, but where Riker is on a planet investigating, and he's made up to look like aliens. He's got the weird hands, or gloves anyway, because they take off his gloves and he's got regular hands and it freaks them out.
Right.
And eventually Picard negotiates, like gets Riker released, and they're like, because they were about to develop warp drive, and the president of this faction that has him, he's like, yeah, we're not ready. People are too xenophobic. People are not ready to make first contact. So it was interesting.
But that was among the first of the episodes to show pretty much an accidental breach of the Prime Directive.
Yeah, there are accidental ones. Yeah, that was not intentional. But there's also,
then if you go forward, so you know, I should have put this up, but because we're looking at that now, but then you go forward and you look at, say, Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
And Strange New Worlds, first episode.
Yeah.
First Contact, and also a Prime Directive issue.
Yeah.
What did they call it before the Prime
General
Directive?
Order 1.
General Order 1, right. And quite frankly, you know, that was a great almost.
Oh yeah,
Kirk, like, but even he had to resolve it.
Yeah.
And because he didn't want to see them destroy themselves, with this warp weapon. And it was, in a way, the Federation's fault that they stumbled across it.
Yeah.
So he comes up with that, and then Admiral April is able to get them out of it somehow, of being in trouble for it. But then that's where the name, the Prime Directive, gets formed historically.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, it goes all the way up to Strange New Worlds.
Oh, it does.
Prime Directive is a major, feature of Star Trek and the Federation.
Just as a note, there's a 7th season episode called Homeward. It said that Starfleet allowed 60 races to die rather than interfere with their fate. But not on Next Generation, because they're constantly interfering.
Well, I wanted to try to show a clip because I thought it was because it was from Star Trek Enterprise. And there's an episode, which I've forgotten which episode it is, but the Enterprise stumbles across a planet that asks for their help because they have a disease and they haven't been able to cure it. And there's 2 different levels of beings living on this planet, one that's lesser than the other in some way. I didn't rewatch the whole episode, but the reason that I was looking at it was because Phlox has a dilemma, a moral dilemma about whether he should give these people the cure, which he does find, because it would alter the natural development of things potentially. And it is possible in his mind that the lesser species might develop and grow when the other one dies out.
Yeah.
And of course, Archer is being altruistic, and he wants to help them because they've asked for help. And in the end of this, and the problem with it was, in order to have this clip, it would have had to be like 4.5 minutes long, and I didn't want to sitting there watching a clip for 4.5 minutes. But because it would be completely taken out of context if you didn't see the whole scene. But in the end, Archer decides Phlox is right and says that he hopes that someday they will develop some sort of a directive that instructs everyone in Starfleet as to how to handle situations like this, because he believes they should have helped them.
Right.
Well, I think one thing that should be noted too is that a lot of things can be traced back to Return of the Archons and maybe episodes like it around that time frame. But what I enjoyed seeing over the decades as a Trek fan was the evolution of how the Prime Directive was treated and either implemented or totally disregarded over the course of the series. I mean, Leo, of course, brought many great examples that illustrate that evolution. Another one that occurred to me was again TNG season 1, Symbiosis. Again, not a great episode, but a very deft handling of the Prime Directive by Picard in that episode. Like, you know what? We're just going to take away your drugs.
Oh yeah, that was the one with the 2
by
planets.
not fixing your engines, because we don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
If you can figure out how to fix your own engines, fine. But you knew they wouldn't.
Right.
And the only thing that kind of makes a bad impression on me is we have Archer referring, as you just pointed out, Chris, maybe someday they'll have a directive of some kind. Of course, we have Pike deftly handling it. So it just makes poor Kirk, who came after both of them, really a total renegade.
Oh yeah. There's a very much, especially TOS, a real sort of cowboy diplomacy sort of vibe to it, because unlike TNG and Forward, where for the most part they could call back to Starfleet Command anytime. Like there was very few times where they couldn't get through to somebody and say, "Hey, this is what's going on."
Right.
Whereas back then it felt like, well, we're like a message will take 3 weeks to get to the nearest starbase, and then we'll have to wait 3 weeks again.
Right.
So it was kind of like there was a much more like Starfleet captains felt like they had a lot more autonomy because they had to. Otherwise, why are they there?
Yeah, and quite frankly, the Enterprise's under Kirk, the Enterprise's mission was a deep space mission, so they were kind of on their own. And I think I read an article in preparing for this episode where it talked about the fact that some of the Prime Directive was at the captain's discretion.
It would have to be.
Yeah, because the distances involved in the lagging communications, of course.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they were the real frontiersmen, you know.
Right.
Sense. And another thing I wanted to mention too was that there's Return of the Icons obviously has a huge impact and influence on the Prime Directive in its embryonic stages, storytelling. But there are other things going back to it. Chris, you mentioned, of course, when I watched this episode, I was having flashbacks to Best of Both Worlds, you know, because of the Borg and how it was handled. And if you want to take it a step further, I mean, there's no time travel in this episode, but it certainly speaks to the effect that you can have on a society or our own human race if you screw things up, if you go back in time. So
yeah,
right. See, you even missed that one. That's yeah. It's lonely in here without Keith.
And where Keith is like,
it's very
anyway. Yeah. Oh well.
It's interesting because Voyager also, Janeway traded a lot of like Federation tech, and made alliances,
right,
and definitely was stirring the pot in the Delta Quadrant.
Oh, I know there's some Voyager episodes in there because again, I read this article I read just kept listing all the different Prime Directive episodes. I just didn't have time to go and dive into each one, but yeah, there were definitely some Voyager episodes too.
Well, and again, it makes total sense that for whatever reason, and if you look at the whole franchise, it seems like when they were kind of close to home, or at least able to communicate pretty much regularly, that's when they got in the most trouble if they violated the Prime Directive.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, poor, Kirk in the I forget what they call the other universe, but anyway, in Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah, the J.J. Abrams verse.
Sure. They Abrams verse, I guess. But he apparently is only 5 minutes from Earth when he, potentially screws with that planet's, development in the beginning. So when he gets called on the carpet big time, but when the other Prime Kirk's out there in the middle of the cosmos, and you gotta, and of course Janeway especially. I mean, she can't talk to anybody. Ever.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. Yeah. We don't get her talking to people until the very end. Yeah. Well, geez, we're only 38 minutes into the show, but I'm trying to think, is there anything else really to...
Well, I have one last example, and then maybe we can talk about whether we think the Prime Directive is a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's
good.
There's an episode called The Communicator from Star Trek Enterprise, which I think is in the second season, where Reed leaves his communicator on this planet where they've been investigating. They were disguised as aliens and go back to get it, and they get captured. And there's like a sort of, I don't know if it's a Cold War, but there is certainly conflict between two either species or nations on this planet, and then they discovered that because they have red blood, and I guess these aliens have a different colored blood. I haven't seen this episode in a long time.
Right.
I was just reading about it. So they basically, they have to take the people on the Enterprise use a Suliban ship that they have to sort of go in and rescue them.
I remember.
But they get them out, and they get their phase pistol, get the communicator, and they get out. But T'Pol is advising Archer, saying, listen, Vulcans have a policy of non-interference in these sorts of matters. But she admires the fact that he was willing to die to not say like, oh, we're from another planet. We're not, so because they said, well, we're augments. That's why our organs are different. And they're like, well, let's hang them and then dissect them and find out what's going on. And, which again, when you're dealing with, I guess, paranoid, military types, they'll be like, take the most expedient route to get
Right.
what they think they want.
Right.
So, Joe, I'm going to ask you because I've been talking way too much.
Never.
What is your take on the Prime Directive? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, let me bring up one kind of anti-example, and then I'll answer that.
Okay.
The anti-example, as I call it, is this. And again, apologies. It just occurred to me. I don't have the title or even the season of Enterprise at the tip of my tongue. But it was basically, you guys will recognize it, I know. These guys were totally anti-interference, this race. And then, of course, it was revealed at the end that it was the Organians in an earlier stage of their development when then they totally became interferers.
Yeah.
So they found a rationale for sticking their nose in whenever they felt like it and where they felt was justified. So with that in mind, is it a good thing or a bad thing, the Prime Directive? I think it comes down to the age-old question of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Letter of the law, it's hard to argue with it. Don't want to interfere. Don't want to send them on the wrong path.
Right.
Could have disastrous consequences, but every situation is different, especially in deep space.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers the question of whether I think it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I definitely think it's not a quick and easy solution pretty much each and every time it comes up.
Right. I mean, I agree, Joe. I think that again, I think it's one of those rules, even though they talk about people being willing to die and destroy starships and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's definitely a rule of thumb, if you will, that's there to guide Federation personnel and to protect people they come in contact with.
Right.
But are there times when the Federation's altruisticness needs to challenge that? Sure.
Well, it's interesting thinking about the episode Justice in TNG, and Wesley like tramples some flower beds and is sentenced to death.
Right.
Now, while that planet, they were making contact with a planet, and I'm not sure they were warp capable, but they were an advanced civilization.
Right.
Of health enthusiasts and hedonists, it seems
right.
like.
Yeah.
So, and there was that entity that was sort of protecting them, if I'm remembering the episode correctly.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, they're basically, it didn't like zap, it didn't like destroy Wesley like with a thought, like it let its children, govern themselves.
Right.
And Picard argues, and they just like, I guess it's been a while since I've seen the episode. I'm trying to remember. They were kind of like, well, I guess you can take him, but
they weren't happy about it, but they just did it. Picard decided that they had no choice. They had to stick to their values on some level.
At what point does the safety of your crew come above the Prime Directive? And it might be argued that this planet is, I mean, I guess there's not going to be a lot of shore leave issued for it, but it also speaks to a question is like, if they know, like everybody on this planet knows, don't go near the flower beds today.
Right.
It feels like they should have. That feels like it's kind of like give somebody a heads up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was kind of the argument for the end of the episode, which is like, well, how was he supposed to know that?
Yeah, I mean,
especially when Tasha Yar at the beginning said they conducted a full investigation. Oh yeah, common sense stuff, but that also raised the question: what is common sense?
Yeah,
right. That's pretty subjective.
Right.
It is.
Yeah.
So going back to spirit of the law versus the letter of the law.
And then there's that wonderful statue humping episode of the Orville.
That was the episode that stopped me from watching. That after that, I was like, nope, no more.
Yep. That was enough for you. Yep.
No,
enough for me. Yeah.
But listen, the thing is, I mean, I think it's pretty well accepted that the Prime Directive in Star Trek, in the Star Trek universe, was born of the real world Vietnam War and our controversial involvement there.
Right.
And these are timeless issues. That's why the Prime Directive continues as a story element to this day in Star Trek, because those issues are everlasting.
Well, it's interesting. Like the Vietnam War, which obviously was one of those things, there was not going to be a winner. This was just about two great superpowers, playing out their agendas against each other,
right,
in that arena. And as to quote Pike from the first episode of Stranger Worlds, when elephants fight, the grass suffers. So I would say the citizens of Vietnam suffered more than either the Russians, the Red Chinese, or the Americans.
Right.
But it's interesting when you look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. There's definitely a lot of support for Ukraine here in the United States, and I think throughout like NATO nations, I think everybody's basically doesn't feel like we can't just say non-interference and let Putin do whatever he wants. Although the Ukrainians certainly are. I'm glad that we're supporting them, but the Ukrainians are not effing around.
No.
They, as the Russian troops have sort of realized, because the Russian military was ill-equipped to fight this war, and still is.
Right.
They're conscripting prisoners and all sorts of other, really, war crime, level, acts.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad that we are, interfering. We're not sending our own troops, but we're sending supplies, and we're maybe sending people to train, their troops on equipment. So, yeah. Sometimes I think you have to break the prime directive. I guess that's it is a case by case basis.
Yes.
Yes. But I've never seen any. I'd be interested to see an episode of Star Trek where somebody actually, is tried for interfering with or found guilty of, violating the prime directive.
Sure, because mostly where you've seen that occur, well, I mean, I think in the Omega Glory the one with
Yangs and the Combs, right?
Yeah, the Yangs and the Combs. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that he would have been.
Oh, absolutely.
He's phasering people with, hundreds of, thousands of people. And I think that if the professor from Patterns of Force had not died, somebody would have called him onto the carpet.
Yeah. He wasn't Starfleet, but it also there are a lot of efficient societies. You chose the Nazis, right? So you thought you could have all the efficiency of Nazis without the Nazi, because that's not how it works.
Yeah. Well, where that episode came from. That episode came from the fact that there were a lot of cool Nazi shit in storage from World War II movies. And they thought, let's do a Nazi episode.
It's backlot episode.
And quite frankly, for a Jewish man, Bill Shatner looked great as an SS officer. So,
but
I think they actually had a name
on
for
the gear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they had a name for it at one point. I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to call it. It was something like Smith's theory of parallel evolution. That's how they explained all the backlot stories, basically. Why there's so many Earth-like planets. Thankfully, TNG came with the holodeck, so they didn't have to come up with that all the time. But
now there is a flaw, by the way. Jumping back to because I don't think we're going to do a Bread and Circuses episode, but there was one flaw that I stumbled across, and that is McCoy says the Romans didn't have sun worshippers.
Yes.
And that's not really true, because they had gods that.
Yeah. Well, I think primitive sun cults tend to be, I'm assuming he's referring to like maybe not as advanced in Rome as like earlier in human history. But of course, it is also unique in it's the only episode that references Christianity.
Yeah.
Because Uhura is like, they don't mean the sun in the sky, they mean the Son of God.
Right.
It is Caesar and Christ, they had them both.
They had them both. Yeah.
And I do feel like that's all something that might be interesting in going back to, like, see if they advance enough. Like maybe it's been, I don't know how long it takes. Well, it's funny because they were, late 20th century level technology.
Right.
And warp drive was invented in the 21st century, sort of mid 21st century, and it's been over 100 years in the Star Trek sort of timeline, maybe a little more. So if the citizens of that planet, have they developed a warp drive? Are they gonna? I would love to see that episode, to see them coming.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting to go back and revisit that.
Yeah, and see, did Christianity, did it find root in the society? Have they turned away from worshiping a pantheon of gods versus worshiping a singular God?
Yeah.
So
that's very true. Hey, how much of a pain in the ass is that? So I can't remember his name now. You had the 3 old men that are in the boarding house.
Yes.
And the one that rats them all out. Weaselly pain in the ass he was.
Yeah, let's call him Rat.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Kind of a rat face.
How he got to be friends with the other 2, I have no idea.
They're like, no, it's just a joke. He's like, no, it's blasphemy. It's like one of these guys who's got nothing else going on.
Yeah.
Well, then again, think about it because it occurred to me watching the episode again. The guy may have been fundamentally decent at one point, just like the main rebel. But boy, when he was collapsing there at the end. Fortunately, Kirk put them all out of their misery. But and the thing I was going to say, Return of the Archons. I mean, as we pointed out, not the best, not the worst. Fun to watch it again because it's been a while since we all watched it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not the first to delve into the basics of a computer controlling a society's life. I mean, I thought of 2 things. I thought of Twilight Zone episode called The Old Man in the Cave.
Right.
Which turned out to be the physical box with real tapes on it, controlling them. But the thing that really impressed me, and I'm not suggesting that people that are writing current stuff or recent stuff are looking back to this episode specifically, but they're looking back to that classic concept. So there's the influence. And another thing that occurred to me was when I was watching this episode and the way they spoke, the way they interacted, and it was a religion, and it reminded me of The Handmaid's Tale, which is an excellent series for those that are not keeping up with it. And I had vibes of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, how do you even explain the robotic nature of these individuals, both in their frenzy and in their dormant state? And
and it's never really explained because. Oh, I do want to say before I get into that point. Now I hope I'm not butchering your name, but Andrew McCann.
Andy McCann, he's a friend of mine. Yes,
Andy McCann. Okay, there you go. Well, he gave us a nice thumbs up, which is
thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy. But what I was going to say is, where in this controlled, altered, no war, no violence, no crime society, where does the Red Hour fit in?
I guess because human beings, assuming that the people on this planet are human beings, there's, or parallel human beings, that they are, that they have these urges, they have these dark thoughts, and this is like a steam valve that lets them to blow off steam. Because otherwise,
I mean, I get that, but it's interesting because it nowhere in Landru's dialogue does he explain the necessity of that.
No, they don't. It's again, it's not a great episode. But it does feel like that could have been explained. We're like, well, why do you do this? Is well, people, especially younger people, have, they're full of urges, and this is a way for them to express it.
Because he says specifically, there's no crime, there's no, violence, no war, and yet they're beating the crap out of each other. I assume, presumably, women are getting raped, storefronts are being destroyed, all kinds of shit's going down. So to say that there is none of that on the planet is not true. It happens at the festival.
Yeah. Well, at the festival, and I'll be honest. I mean, I long before the Purge movies came out, somehow as a younger person, even as a teenager, I understood that this was a necessary venting of the steam to keep the piece the rest of the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I get that point. I just think it's interesting that it doesn't get acknowledged at all by Landru. But,
yeah, a couple lines of dialogue might have helped in that regard.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you know.
Yeah, because they definitely act like, you know, human beings can be programmed like machines, and they clearly are.
Right.
But to what end? Again, you know, that's never made clear. It's, you know, open to interpretation, which is not a bad thing, but sometimes we like a little bit more of an explanation.
Right.
Yeah, again, it feels like a line or two might have explained that with, you know, you can maybe cut out some of the extra, you know, nonsense.
Yeah, exactly. Hey guys, it's 56 after the hour. Next week, I think we're going to do a Klingon.
Yes.
A Klingon episode.
The Klingons.
We're going to look at
Errand of Mercy.
Errand of Mercy, which is the first episode that introduces the Klingons.
And the Organians.
And the Organians, yeah. And I have here my Katenga.
Nice.
Very nice.
This is actually a model that I'm using along with a few other things and props. We're going to hopefully do a new opening for the show. And doing some old school blue screen work along with 3D modeling. So hopefully it'll be fun. And I got to finish up my Katenga. It's not all painted yet. But it does light up, which is kind of fun.
Well, it does light up. I was kind of admiring the dark, sleek nature of the paint.
Yeah.
As it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm bumping a lamp right now to show it to you, but yeah, it's
very cool.
Model. The only thing I don't like about the kit is that the torpedo is always lit, and both in the front and in the back. And I know that if I thought about it, I could probably figure out how to turn that off. But you'd have to come up with a separate circuit. And
they're always prepared to fire first.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that tracks.
And funny story, I had this model out because I was getting ready to take it up to we have a house up in Northwest Connecticut, and I was getting ready to take all my stuff up there. I thought I was going to be broadcasting from there tonight, but it turned out the weather was bad, and we decided not to go. But so the model's sitting out, and my grandson sees it, and my Penny, who you see dance a lot of time at the end of the show, my daughter, they both were fascinated with it. So I showed them the opening of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which has that great scene with the 3 Klingon ships attacking V'ger, and they had to watch it 3 times. They just loved it. So
that's great.
Yeah,
it's kind of a highlight of that movie. It
is a highlight of that movie.
Our pal Craig Lubin, and sometimes because of the show, Craig Lubin said it's like people in Star Trek watching TV, because they basically spend. It's a lot of stuff on the bridge of them just watching the main view screen.
Right.
So
right. Yeah.
Well, it was Jerry Seinfeld, I think, that made the joke in one of his routines. He wanted to have a living room like the Bridge of the Enterprise, because you got the big screen TV over here.
Big screen. Cabin has a big chair.
Yeah. And sometime we should do an episode on that film and then talk about the changes that were made following up with Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
Because they're very different projects. And Wrath of Khan basically saved the franchise in a way, because
it did. Yeah.
So
covered that to great extent when I looked at Space Heat a couple weeks ago, and for good reason.
Yeah.
Although it's funny, I did watch another young woman's videos, and I don't remember her name, and I should have written it down, but she did a YouTube video called the 10 dumb things that happened in.
Yeah, I sent you that's the part. There's a big Star Trek sort of channel on YouTube,
right?
And Sean Farrick, who is an Irish gentleman who was reviewing Prodigy,
right,
along the same time as us, and also I believe he reviewed all the Eagle Moss ships.
Oh, cool!
You can find those on. And he's like, oh, look at this.
There,
yeah. He would unbox it, and he would talk about what was in the magazine and whether he liked it or not. He was like he was generally very positive.
Yeah.
So they're part of the same network of Trek video content creators.
Cool.
So yeah, check them out.
Yeah, but there was one bit that she mentioned, and I'll say this before we roll out of here. She was talking about the prefix codes.
Oh yeah,
and how basically the prefix code for the Reliant is simpler to crack than like a password for your.
I'm almost positive, Chris, you're talking about a young lady named Allison Prager.
Could be.
Okay.
Because I've seen that video.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's hilarious. So
she is, and it's very funny. And it's
also the fact that it was like 6 digits, and
they can't repeat.
They can't repeat because they've got like little toggles.
Yeah.
And it's like 4, 7, 3, and it's like you can't have 4, 3, 3.
Right.
Because there's only 1 3 toggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not using like a keyboard.
Right.
They're just using toggles.
Right.
So it does feel like that would be easily cracked. I'm hoping somebody addressed that. Maybe somebody read the action report after the incident with Khan and be like, yeah, we got to fix that.
Right.
Well, I don't know how much progress they made because I have to make fun of Star Trek V for just a moment in that vein.
Yeah.
Where Kirk had his little pad that he enters logs in.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to watch that when it actually pops apart and malfunctions because I think it says system malfunction. It's actually etched into the glass. So all this thing does is malfunction apparently because that's all you can read on it.
That's funny. Hey, we got a heart. We got a heart from Chris Mitchell.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
I appreciate that. All right, guys, it is the Red Hour. It's time to go out and break up the town and conk a few people on the head for 6 hours or however long it is, 12 hours. So next week, we're going to look at Errand of Mercy. We're going to talk about the introduction of the Klingons and the development of the Klingons throughout the series. And that should be a lot of fun. And we only have, I think Leo and I looked at it. We have 3 of these episodes left before Star Trek Picard launches.
Yes.
So I think we're going to pick one more in between. And I think we might end with Mirror, Mirror. I'm not sure.
Good one.
Yeah. At any rate, if you have any suggestions for an episode you think would be most influential or have a great impact on future Trek, put it in the comments and let us know, or post it on our Facebook page.
Right.
I guess that's pretty much it for this week, guys. Have a wonderful week. Thank you again to my good friends Leo and Joe.
Thank you, Chris.
And
Thank you.
Again, lots of fun. And we will see you. Hang on, I'm losing my mouse here. And we will see you all next week. Take care.
Yeah.
All right.
Live long and prosper.